Try turning it off and on again. Try turning it off and on again.
Can you see me?
Hey, bud. Yep, I just saw you log on just now. Yep.
Sorry about that. You know
That's
me
quite
in technology.
Yeah. Just we are still going to have to wrap up at 5:30 because I do have another appointment right away afterwards.
Okay.
So if you want to jump right into it, we can do that. You'd mentioned
Sure.
that you want to try and go over some of the feedback that you had previously.
Yeah. Did you get the from the original submission?
Yep, there was a couple of notes there. Yep.
Was there anything there that is something new that I should be concentrating on, or have we already concentrated on that?
I think for the most part, we talked about that during the classes already. Here, I'm just going to switch my a little bit better. Let me just call it up because I saved that email after you sent it to me. So the notes from your original submission. So strengths of you starting right away into prepared material. That's always a great thing to do in a showcase set because you want to be there telling the viewer, the judge, the booker, whatever, hey, I'm here for comedy. I'm here to make your audience laugh. So that's a really great thing. So both the judges mentioned that you would benefit from word economy. I think we talked about that a lot in the class about tightening up some of the jokes so you remove some of the excess language that doesn't necessarily need to be there and try to focus a little bit more on the efficient versions of the jokes because that'll also reduce the time between when you get your laugh points with the punchlines if you can try and get your joke setups really quick. And so also increase engagement, command of the audience. I think sometimes there's some moments where you may have lost a little bit of their attention, and it might have been as a result of some of the material that you chose to do. And we talked about this in week 1 of the class and also a few times throughout the 6-week period. But things like having a few jokes that were just kind of like shock for shock's sake, or potentially could have used some tightening up of the joke structure, creates that little bit of distance between you and the audience as they're trying to catch up to what you intended. And so I think one of the improvements that you made throughout the 6 weeks was trying to communicate your intent a little bit stronger. So I thought that was good. The notes on stage we've talked about, and talking about trying to get as much stage time as possible so that you can bring that conversational tone to the stage relative to the being out on stage and looking like you're trying to be a comedian, and instead just going out on stage and being yourself and trying to be engaging in that way. And so those were like the notes from the original video. And then, of course, in week 1, we had the class where we all discussed that, and you had some feedback not only from myself, but also from some of the other comedians. And then even the week that Joe Lowers came on and provided some additional feedback. So I think all of those areas kind of tended to increase in scope your focus on trying to like be as efficient as possible in your joke telling. I think that would be the greatest area that maybe you could improve, is to be a little bit more efficient in joke telling, because then that way you get quicker hits, kind of like that example of Tim Lucas that I sent you. Like if you notice, he doesn't have a lot of excess words in his setups. It's just kind of like give the information that the person needs and then move on to the funny part of the joke. And so
Yeah,
I think
I met him and talked to him, and
yeah,
he told me actually
he
you
did.
gave him that dance. You were the one that gave him the dance. Like he's like, what do you mean by that? And you gave him the dance,
Yeah,
and
he
now he
did.
does the dance.
Yeah, because it's a way of creating this non-verbal act out where he can skip saying yay sometimes, and just by doing the dance the audience will do it for him, which really shows to the booker and the judges that the audience is engaged with you. So it was kind of an interesting technique for him to start trying, and then it worked really well for him. Some of the other things that we've talked about a little bit, and you mentioned in your initial email about booking this session, is maybe going on that time scale and kind of perceived experience versus actual experience and that does tie into stage time quite a bit. So the more stage time you get, obviously, the more you're going to appear to be more polished. And I mean this in the general you for every single comedian, not just you specifically, Joe. But the more a comedian gets on stage, the more they get more conversational or closer to the voice that they're seeking on stage. So then it comes off as more confident and comfortable. And so quite often it takes comedians quite a bit of time to find what that persona is going to be, or the voice or the tone or the delivery or the pacing, or even characterizations, but more so like actual, as close to authentic as you can get for a persona. And that can take a long time. So one of the real benefits of attending a class like the 6-week showcase prep class that we did for the main event was providing some techniques and examples and elements that bookers are looking for, either as red flags or as positive green flags. And that can help fast track the perceived experience that you might have as a comedian. Now, there's also the element of how often is someone going up and how frequently are they performing. And there's obviously ways to try to increase that, whether it's finding out within your own scene, whether there's additional stage time that you can seek, or whether it's creating your own independent show that you book yourself that gives you extra stage time. Vancouver is it's a city of almost 2 million people. It has a great comedy scene, but the great comedy scene really evolved from keen and interested comedians starting to run their own independent shows, which gave themselves more stage time, and also by proxy allowed other people within the marketplace to have additional stage time as well. And so to get to that level of comfort and conviction that a comedian needs on stage, that really highlights that, oh, okay, this person's ready for club work, or this person is kind of ironed out the kinks, you're looking at needing to perform probably on average more than once a day. So like probably 10 to 15 times a week. And so one of the real interesting byproducts of the pandemic is comedy was forced to shift online for about a year and a half. But then comedians realized that that was still a viable option for performing. Sometimes it's just in the scope of an open mic that might only be attended by other comedians. But then that can even function almost a little bit like half performance, half writing workshop, and can be very effective tools to help speed up that development of what your stage presence is going to be. And so even if you're only able to perform locally live on a stage, maybe 3 times a week, if you can, obviously a higher number is better. But if you can augment that with some of these online open mics, then that can be a really effective tool to fast track developing that persona or character from the stage. There's clients that I deal with outside of the scope of the classes that I do, that I just do one-on-one. And one of them was working towards a booked live audition to get passed at a comedy club in New York City. And he ended up doing 3 or 4 online mics a day just to run the routine. So it became more second nature as he was performing it. Even if it wasn't in front of like a live audience, it wasn't physically on a stage, he was still in an environment where he was restricted by time, restricted by the reaction of the people watching him, and also needed to develop that sixth sense of internal timing of what his showcase set was going to be. And so he and I started consulting about 2 months before his audition, and I would suggest that he ended up running his set maybe 100 times before he performed it live, between like being on stage and doing these online open mics. And so those can be effective tools. Now, that was a very long-winded answer to the direct question that you asked, which was, where would I place you right now if I was going to kind of draw that kind of rising scale of development for a comedian? And given that there sort of are inherently almost every single comedian's development, a plateau at like the 9-month level, another one at the 18-month level, another at about 4.5 years, and then another one for professional comedians at around the 10 or 12-year mark. I would probably still characterize you as someone in the 9-month-ish range of experience. I know that it's longer for you, but I think part of the reason why it's projecting that way is not getting the volume of stage time as frequently as possible on a week-to-week basis. And then also kind of mental approach to comedy, going from an interest and being almost like a dedicated hobbyist to someone who's now in a stage where they're being analytical and self-aware and writing all these notes like you're doing. And when you start that part of your development as a comedian, to me, that's kind of day one. You know, like it may be, you may have been on stage 20 years ago and done some mics back then, or been involved in it for 3 or 4 years back then on a kind of like once or twice a month or once or twice every 6 months basis. But not until you get back dedicated to it, like being a craft instead of a hobby, is when I kind of feel like the internal clock starts on someone's age as a comedian. And so the goal for you is to try and speed bump past this 9-month hiccup that a lot of comedians run into, and try and fast track yourself to the 18-month hiccup and try and work through that as well. And so the internalization that a lot of comedians have, and I'll just share from the experiences that I have, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's directly relatable to you or that it relates to every single comedian, but in general, comedians who start treating it as a craft, after about 9 months, they start to see a little bit of success in terms of having more opportunities either at local mics or local independent shows, or maybe even getting a guest spot at a club. And at that point, in their mind, because they're getting these extra opportunities, many of these comedians feel as if they've figured out their voice and figured out, oh, I've got 20 minutes of material or 25 minutes of material. I have tons of stories I can share. And then when these opportunities present themselves and they start accepting them, whether it's at a festival like the World Series of Comedy or it's a guest spot at something like Crackpots, then all of a sudden there's the, oh my goodness, I thought I had 25 minutes of strong material. But in reality, if I'm going to equate this to comedy club caliber material, and they could book anyone there. They could book Kenny Mock, who won the World Series of Comedy last year, or they could book Pete Walnick, like I think he's at Crackpots, I think this week. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this 25 minutes I thought I have is actually really more like 3 minutes of very good material and 22 minutes of ideas. And so that's usually the first plateau that many comedians have to break through and go, okay, let me re-examine these ideas and get them as strong as my strongest material. Because now, instead of me being evaluated as a relatively new person within the environment on my best jokes, as I transition to contests, festivals, and club work, I'm now being judged on my worst jokes. Your best jokes are just assumed to be good. And so that there's this change, this like ideological shift in joke writing and set construction to make sure that your weakest link is still as strong as your strongest joke. And so that's a big push that a lot of comedians have at about the 9 or 10 month range. And then from that point on, they're more focused on writing material that fits the voice that they know audiences relate to as they're performing. So if the audiences are starting to relate to you as this awkward, smart guy who also does dumb things, then you're going to start leaning towards writing jokes that fit an awkward guy who's smart but does dumb things. And that's going to lead you to be able to write more jokes that are much closer to their final stage in their first draft than maybe the 9 months you had to go through of like, okay, here's an idea. I'd love to talk about driving in a tractor. I don't know how to make that relatable to an audience. And it takes you 6 months to figure out the joke will work a certain way. Now, as you kind of break through that 9 month barrier, you're going to start thinking in terms of, oh, I know this joke is already going to work based on the persona I know the audience connects with me. And so then usually there's about a 1 or 1.5 year phase there that takes someone to about the 18-month stage. And that's when the level of confidence of, okay, all of my material is as strong as this 3 minutes that I thought I had at the 9-month mark. So now I'm really ready to break through to the next level where I'm confident that if I got 7 minutes, all 7 minutes are going to be as good as my best joke. If I get advanced in a showcase set, or if I'm hired to do weekend work and I have to do 12 minutes, I'm confident that the 12 minutes will be as funny as my funniest joke.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of the development that a comedian has. And almost every single comedian goes through that same cycle. And it's driven by, like, the escalating part of it is driven by ego and hard work. And the plateau part of it is driven by self-doubt. And so it's kind of like a matter of, how do I keep bursting through this bubble of self-doubt in this ego-driven business, but still am pragmatic enough, realistic enough, that, okay, if I objectively look at my material, I do now trust that it's strong enough to play in a club for every second that I'm on stage. And so if those are the two plateaus to try and break through, then part of the discussion that you and I, or you and other people who might consult with you or coach with you or mentor you, need to shift the discussion shift from individual jokes to goals as a comedian, to what do you want to achieve in the business? Do you want to focus more on writing? Do you want to focus more on performing? Do you want to be in contests and festivals? Do you want to be in clubs? Do you want to be in independent rooms? Do you want to be able to do, like, book out your own 200-seat venue, because that's probably going to be more cost effective and financially viable than a weekend of work at a club? Or do you want to, like, skew this towards one person show and maybe start looking at fringes and alt comedy avenues? So, like, part of what happens is, if you break through those two barriers, now a more varied number of opportunities are presented to you as a comedian. And so then it starts to become, okay, the areas of focus for me are less about jokes and joke writing and persona crafting, because I kind of now understand the fundamentals of that, to more like goal setting. What do I want to do? Do I want to do well at a festival? Do I want to work at a weekend at a club? So someone you probably hung out with a lot a couple weeks ago, Emmanuel T, out of Indianapolis. Manny did a lot of that. Like, for the first year or two we knew him in the festival, he was just really interested in comedy and a keener and wanted to learn, and didn't really have a lot of long-term goal setting. If you jumped on his social media and started tracking backwards, you'd probably see 3 years ago a post where it's like, oh, I was on the late night Registered Comics show. My goal next year is to be in the top 101. And then last year is like, managed to perform in the top 101. My goal next year is to advance. You know, like, he has like this 6 or 7 year plan to try and get to maybe the quarterfinals or finals of an event, either specifically the World Series of Comedy, or an event like it, like Big Sky, or some of these other Great Lakes Comedy Festival. And it's more about, oh, okay, if I have this long-term goal, then I can break it down into smaller, actionable elements. And we kind of did that in the class as well. It's like, we could talk about a large concept like trying to be more consistent on stage, but we would break that down into those core 4 elements of thematically being consistent, quality being consistent, those elements that you can actually work on and make changes in your writing and performing style to achieve the goal of being more consistent. And so Manny has parlayed this long-term goal of doing well at the World Series of Comedy into a focus on sharpening his writing and performing skills, which has had a positive byproduct of starting to get paid work. So his goal was to do well in the festival. So that was what his focus was in terms of improving as a comedian. The byproduct of improving as a comedian is he now has more opportunities for paid work at clubs and independent shows. So he features, I think, for Dennis Tooley and Jake Tooley's production company. So the shows that they run independently, he does some feature work there. He's hosted for them. He's done some work with another bunch of other bookers that come to the main event. So it's kind of an interesting way of approaching it is that this long-term goal that seemed to be singular of doing well at the festival created a focus in the way that he was performing, which had this byproduct of actually helping him throughout his entire comedy career. And so one of the things that I think you might want to take away from our conversation today is start to think about, okay, what are realistic goals for how many times I can perform a week so I can start to break through that kind of plateau area and get a little bit more comfortable on stage and start writing stuff that kind of like fits me quicker in the writing process. And then maybe some like super long-term goals, and then start working your way backwards from the super long-term goals and figure out, okay, these are manageable and actionable, and I can maybe do something about this, and it'll have a positive side effect of opening other doors for me as well.
Well said.
Yeah, so I think those are the elements that you kind of asked in your initial email about this follow-up session.
Did you get a chance to go over what Dennis Tooley gave me feedback about? What's your thoughts
I did.
about that?
Yeah, so I like Dennis a lot, and I respect his opinion a lot, and he and I think quite similarly
of you.
Yeah, well, that's really nice of him to say. We have very similar approaches to comedy, and even though he skews cleaner than I do, I understand the reasoning behind that. And he and I had this really, really interesting conversation last year about the difference between being naughty and being clean. And it's really helped inform me when I speak with clients now about what clean means. It doesn't necessarily mean squeaky, squeaky clean. It just means you're not being unnecessarily egregiously offensive towards the audience. You can let them fill in the blanks, let them fill in the naughty parts, and you can still get away with kind of like innuendo and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, when Dennis told you like to think of your showcase set as taking the audience on a journey, like having everyone jump on the bus and you drive them through the entire journey that you're going to be on, I think that's a really good analogy, because if you think about that and deconstruct that concept of having everyone jump on board with you as the bus driver and taking them on this journey, that really is just a different way of saying an effective defining statement to let the audience know where you're going to take them can be a really smart way to start your set. And so I think that that's a really good way for him to like initiated his feedback with you. Is like when they ask, what do you think is funny? You've already kind of told them based on your first couple of jokes, persona style defining, writing style defining, and giving a few personal quirks about yourself, whether it's that you're awkward or you're very particular about some stuff, like when you talk about being an engineer, like that opens up the idea for the audience to have some preconceived notions about you, and then you can now play on those preconceived notions in the writing of your material. Yeah, getting a good tape is an important element of taking that next step as a comedian. I spoke with the winner of the 2017 main event of the World Series of Comedy, just bumped into him one day and talked to him about, what do you feel like the percentages between proving that you're funny and hustling out there to get work? And he said, well, for the first 3 or 4 years of my comedy life, after I started taking it really seriously as a craft, I had to constantly prove I was funny. And a good way to do that was to have a good tape that you could send off to someone, or get referrals from other respected comedians that you've worked with, that sort of thing. And then once you break through that plateau and you're just generally understood to be funny enough, then it turns to almost 99% hustling, getting out there, contacting people, networking them, asking for stage time in a polite and professional and respectful way of, do you guys have an open mic night? Or do you have a professional amateur night? Do you do live auditions? I'd love to work at your club. What's the easiest way for me to get on stage with you? Oh, I happen to have family in that town. Even if you don't, just say you do. And so it was like, yeah, I can crash with my Aunt Mary in buttfuck, Iowa, while I happen to be going through the state, and I can stop in and do a set with you. Like anything that you can do to convince bookers that you're easy to work with and you're also funny is the best way to get work in comedy. And so that can start with a good tape. So as an example, if the higher quality video that you get back from Steven for the main event performance is sufficient in terms of quality that you're comfortable with, you could use that next year for your submission to the World Series of Comedy. And maybe that gets you into the top 101 or right on the border. So maybe you're an alternate or that sort of thing. Or if you come out to some of the satellite events and you get a free tape of performing at one of the satellite events. So anytime you can get a better quality tape of you being on a professional looking stage in front of a live audience, that helps a lot in terms of helping your toolbox as a comedian. The seminars are fantastic. So hopefully you have the links to all of those. I would just go through and kind of like the Q&As are the most interesting to me. Like some of the seminars that are like straightforward, the business of comedy, like Dante did, very informative. But in terms of like getting into the head of bookers and how they digest comedy and consume comedy and choose to share comedy with their patrons, some of the industry Q&As are the best for those. You never know what kind of nuggets are going to come out of that because depends who the moderator is, depends who the audience is and what questions were asked. But I would go through and watch the Q&As first. Then I would look after that towards more of like the business of comedy seminars. Dante's is very good. I'm just trying to call up the seminar list here. I think I have it on spreadsheet on my laptop here. So the Insights ones, I don't think you're going to find a ton of value from those, but Dante's, David Kay is great. Mark, I think might have been more about voice work and monetizing your intellectual property as a comedian, which I think is a really good thing. Cruise lines, I don't think you need to worry too much about yet, because I think cruise line jobs don't come to comedians until they're like around the 6, 7, 8 year point of their career for the most part. It just seems like a real fundamental element that cruise ship directors want is actual tangible experience, not perceived experience, actual tangible experience, because you're in such a closed environment that if you're not fully experienced as a road comedian, if you run into an issue on the cruise, you're stuck with those patrons for the next 5 days. You could be having breakfast at the buffet the next day with the guy who heckled you, and it become very tense, and it turned what should have been a positive experience for them as a guest on the ship into a potential negative one. So generally speaking, cruise ship bookers almost always have like a 6 or 7 year minimum experience from like the day you started taking it seriously as a craft before you're even considered for booking. So in terms of the seminar, not necessarily the most poignant to your current progression of your development in comedy, but maybe one that still watch after you've watched the others for any interesting kind of like insights in terms of what they have to say about the style of comedy they're looking for, because that can be very informative. Because if maybe a long-term goal 6 years from now, so let's just choose 2031, maybe you want to get booked at least on one cruise ship in 2031. Well, if you look now at what they're looking for, you can spend those 6 or 7 years developing that trait for them, so that when the time to audition comes around, boom, you're ready for them. Eric Lambert is an interesting dude. I don't know how much you hung out with him at the main event. He runs APCA, so
I signed up. I signed up for that.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. So his job is basically as a facilitator. He facilitates the networking between decision makers in colleges and comedians and or their representatives and or other variety acts. It's not just limited to comedy. But an important element with APCA is to go into it, and I don't know if you spoke with Eric directly, but go into it being able to sell a story about yourself, like what makes you unique as a performer. Because often these performances, if you do get booked, are like hour long, and it's meant to sort of be 20-minute storytelling, 40-minute stand-up. And the storytelling part is meant to be something that a college student could take away as a life lesson. Like, you're more likely to be booked if they can promote going to see this particular comedian who also has overcome something or achieved something or it's that kind of thing. So having the story that you can sell is an important element when you go to showcase at APCA. And then also pricing yourself reasonably is important as well. For someone who's newer in the developmental scale of stand-up comedy, I probably wouldn't price yourself over $1,000 a night for a college gig, even though they can be lucrative and you can get up to $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000. An agent will push you towards that dollar figure because they get a percentage cut of it. But 100% of nothing is still nothing. So
Right.
if you're charging $3,000 and they're like, oh, lost you for a sec. Are you still there on audio? I lost your video.
Are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't see you right now. Oh, you're back now. Okay, cool.
Okay. Yeah, the reason
So-
I was interested in him is because I've written a book. I'm also
Oh, cool.
an expert in quality, reliability, and durability. I've worked for Honda R&D for 32 years in that area. I'm an
So
insider.
what's the book
I can
that you
talk
wrote?
about lots of different topics about my book, about this, that, and the other. And I was thinking more from that viewpoint. I have
Yep.
more than just comedy.
Right. What did you write the book about?
The book is about how to strengthen your relationship with God, your spouse, your children, and your world. Now, he
Okay.
mentioned to me, like, you got to be careful about religion.
You do.
So you might not want to talk about that aspect of your book.
Right.
And of course, the other stuff is about, how to have a successful business from a standpoint of pleasing your customer. That's what the best companies do. They focus on pleasing the customer. It's not about
yeah.
SPC tools and all that stuff,
Yeah.
which I know till I go regurgitate. But it's
Yeah,
about fundamental
almost
mindset.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And if you can tie that into if you can have some comedy that comes from that point of view first as the introduction to it, then you can talk about the book and then kind of like wrap up with your straightforward stand up. I think that would be an interesting presentation to try and sell. But again, not to be dismissive of you personally, but just in general to any comedian who isn't a known commodity, known name, the purchasers of these one night events from colleges would be like, oh, why am I spending $3,000 on John Smith? I don't know. I should just book a John Smith. I don't know. That's $1,000. So I would just be careful with like the price point. If you do go and you set up you do a showcase there, and if you set up a booth or a kiosk or advertise some stuff, there's a couple other things that if you do go to one of the APCA events, I would suggest going a couple days early, try and network in the evening with some of the bookers before you do your showcase, almost like drumming up interest in your showcase. Go with business cards, go like that, outline who you are and maybe even talk about the book on the business card, like on the back, do like a thing of the book and a QR code so people can get to it. But yeah, do the like networking element before. Don't just go and fly in on a Tuesday morning. If your showcase is Tuesday at 1 p.m., go up on stage for 7 minutes and hope that people book you. Go in there a few days early and like try and start flaming the embers of interest for yourself. And that would be a far more effective technique to potentially getting some booked work. There's a comedian, was not a known name, had a story that was interesting to sell with the World Series of Comedy. He was literally homeless, living in his car, had just got out of 4 years in the military. And he happened to be diagnosed with autism, and the autism manifests itself physically, almost like Tourette's. And so he had this story about, he would talk about that he doesn't have Tourette's, but it looks like he has Tourette's while he's telling the story. And then he goes, well, it's actually an autism diagnosis, and then started talking about all that kind of stuff, and then found humor in that realm and made it okay for people to laugh with him at the ailments and the struggles that he goes through. And he went to APCA and he booked 37 nights at $1,500 a night. The first time he went and showcased there. So he went from being homeless with the World Series of Comedy to having $52,000 on the books. And within a year of that, just because it was at the college gigs and would overlap with some bigger names, or be in town at a college gig and would be like, oh man, I'm going to go check out. I only have the one show on a Thursday night. I'm going to go check out who's headlining at the club this weekend, and then would end up chatting with those comics. And he ended up opening a hockey arena show for Kurt. Why am I blanking on his name? For Bert Kreischer. Within like a year of being homeless, he did this entire journey. And so it was about branding himself and selling himself and finding the story to share, and then living within that realm, not outstretching his boundaries, not trying to do more than he's capable of, but then also networking in a very positive way. And so, as I alluded to earlier when I was talking with Jason Cheney, who won the main event in 2017, it becomes about proving that you're funny, and then it becomes about the hustle. And so a lot of that is a direct result of goal setting, because with goal setting, then you can figure out where to focus your energy on proving that you're funny. And then once you've achieved that goal, then you can start the real focus, which is on hustling for work. And so you can't start hustling for work if you don't know what work you want to hustle for. So the mindset becomes, okay, do I want to be a club comic? Do I want to be an independent show comic? Do I want to do sketch? What do I want to work in writing and maybe sell my material to like an established comedian? Lots of different avenues to explore to monetize the intellectual property of stand-up comedy. And it starts with like this granular idea of what's my long-term goal, and then work your way backwards to begin to achieve that.
Yes. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask what other questions you had.
I guess as I approach to start making new material, should I take it as, okay, I got 4 minutes maybe that are good or decent, 4 or 5, and then build off of those, make those branches longer and wider? Or should I start with other things and then paste it together?
Comedians take different approaches to it. My suggestion, because you tend to skew towards writing jokes that present a little bit closer to one-liners, is that I think you would want to probably skew towards the latter of those two options, of like start to explore intent. Like what do you find weird and funny in the world, and then write a joke about that and see if you can get it towards that same voice that you have for the engineering joke or that type of thing. So you're not really much of a long form storyteller. That's not a good or a bad thing. It's just the style that you've skewed towards early on in your development is more of like one-liner joke telling. And so then the way to get more stage time is generally to write more of these one-liners. But it's important to start to write those jokes from intent. Like what weird scenario did you find funny? I don't know if you ever did look up the Stephen Wright podcast with Conan O'Brien, where he talks about how after about 9 months he changed from writing jokes he expected the audience to think were funny to just writing stuff that he was noticing in the world around him, that his brain uniquely connected and he thought was weird. And if he was confident enough and convicted enough in sharing these weird thoughts, then the audience would also think it was funny and weird. And so I think that that's a really good place to approach joke writing, is from noticing weird things in your world and trying to figure out a way to make them connect and then relate to the audience.
I know we're running long a little bit. Just real quick, in the Columbus area, it seems like it's very cliquish, and everyone makes their own shows for themselves and their friends. I'm not part of the clique. That's why I go up to Crackpots and other places in Ohio, because it seems like the area is more we oriented versus is more, you know, everybody's working together oriented versus we're all competing against each other. Do
Right.
you,
So
do you recommend just stay away from those people or try to get in where I can? Or,
I think the
how
thing
do
to
I,
do,
how do I overcome that frustration of my own town? I feel like I'm a stranger in. I get
yeah,
word,
no, that's, yeah.
but
Um,
I notice
so,
clicks going on all over.
right. And so on these instances where you might be contacting someone to ask for stage time and they either don't reply or they say no, are you still going to the show? Or are you just being like, that's it, and I'm moving on?
Some cases I go to the show and go watch.
Yeah, I think that that's an important element that is vastly underrated in comedy, is to be at the shows that you eventually would like to be on. So if you're there like every week, eventually someone is going to start to understand, like, you might just be misunderstood as a comic, not disliked, just misunderstood because they haven't seen you perform enough and they don't get the, like, the semi lean into character work and the fact that you're a little bit more inspired by like the post vaudevillian Bob Newharty, Stephen Wrighty, Mitch Hedbergy style of comedy, as opposed to like the Dave Chappelle storytelling style of comedy. And so I would just go to as many shows as you can, even if you're not scheduled to be on them, because you have a no show, they might want to throw you out for 3 minutes. They might want to throw you out for 5 minutes. So that's one of the good ways to kind of like break through this self-imposed restriction that you might have. A really interesting story to share with you about an established comedian. There's an established comedian originally from New Jersey, moved to Florida and had been in the Florida scene for 4 or 5 years, and a solid comedian. Like, honestly could compete to potentially win the entire main event of the World Series of Comedy, like that level of comic. And so he wanted to sign up for the World Series of Comedy, kind of to see if he could break through at this one club in Sarasota that we were going to, because he was under the impression that he was blackballed there. He wasn't getting booked there. They weren't replying to his emails, none of that kind of stuff. And he goes, "Oh, I'm banned from there." And so Joe and I said, "You're banned? Do you have an email saying that you're banned? Was there an incident? Did someone complain about you? Did you get in a fight with the manager? Did the owner approach you?" Because we know the owners. They love comedians. We know the manager. She's super pro comic. And he's like, "No, just they never book me. I just know that I'm banned there for some reason. I don't know what it is." And Joe said too, he goes, "Give me 10 minutes. I promise you you're not banned from that club." He called the owner, and then we called the comedian back and said to the comedian, "Hey, just got off the phone with the owner. He doesn't know who the fuck you are. You're not banned. Like, if you were banned, they would know who you were, right?" He's like, it's just a byproduct of what the industry of comedy is that there's so many people asking for such little stage time that you're going to be faced with no 20 times more than you're going to be faced with yes. So he kind of was like, okay, he set his ego aside. He signed up for the event and he won the whole thing. Like, he won the 1 week satellite at that event. And even before they got to the semifinals on stage, before the semifinals started, the owner of the club went into the green room and he said, "I just want all 6 of you to have fun tonight. Don't worry about the competition. I think you're all funny. I'm going to book all 6 of you at some point." So the competition is like only the one person who wins gets the paid work there. And the owner went in, and including to this guy who thought he was banned, said, "You guys are funny enough. We'll get you on the stage." And so that's really like a strong metaphor for how comedy scenes can work, is that you might have this perception of being an outsider, and it might just be there's just a lack of stage time because the demand is so high. When we went to East St. Louis for the main event, we stopped in at an open mic at a funny farm, and they had to do a lottery because 87 comedians showed up for 20 spots. And so sometimes it's just the unspoken element. And once you start producing your own show, you realize, oh, there's a lot more to this. And I don't have the time replied to everyone with a gracious decline of stage time to them. It's just like, yeah, you're on, you get 6 minutes or whatever. So it just is kind of like a byproduct of, it's probably a microcosm of how the full industry works, is the limited stage time makes it feel like you're being squeezed out. You know?
I've been trying, and tell me if this is wrong, because my fundamental goal is to be a club comedian, not a backyard barbecue comedian.
Right.
So every time I do a show, does that show or that relationship that I make through that show, does that get me an inch closer to that? So I tend to focus on those shows and not the ones that are more backyard barbecue, comedians, pizza place comedians. Is that wrong for me to think that way?
I would just change the focus of how you perform at those two venues. I would take as much stage time as offered to you. Yeah, you don't want to be pigeonholed as an open micer. But when you do go to an open mic that doesn't feel as if it has the, doesn't feel as if it's the stepping stone to get club work. It just feels like it's a show that's there for the sake of doing a show. When you go to those, that's when you work on your new material. That's when you try word changes in a punchline, or try changing the order of the jokes that you tell, because maybe it resonates better in a different order. If they hear this one joke first, they might get a better sense of your style of humor, or they might get a better sense of who you are as a person. And so every time that if you want to start delineating show opportunities for you between this one's leading towards a golden fleece, this one's treading water, all the ones where you're treading water, work on the craft. All the ones where it's golden fleece, do your showcase set, and then that's where you would start delineating. Because this is the last point that I'll make, because it'll sound extremely counterintuitive, but at the end of the day, jokes don't matter. Individual jokes don't matter. You're not going to be booked based on the alcoholic joke, or you're not going to be booked based on the engineer joke. You're going to be booked on your ability to tell jokes that fit your sense of humor, fit your persona, fit your style of comedy, and make the entire performance feel like it's cohesive and all coming from the same point of view and from the same person and from the same sensibility. So the ability to write jokes from your personal sensibility is the key. But the individual jokes, if you're successful in comedy, they're going to change over time. You're going to replace them with other jokes that are stronger, or other jokes that resonate better, or other jokes that are more timely, or other jokes that just fit the way that you have stylistically on stage better. And so it's really important to break through some of these plateau areas by coming to the realization that the individual jokes don't matter. It's okay for me to start abandoning some of my material and replacing it with other material if that other material is closer to me projecting who I am as a comedian and as a person on stage. And so that's a fundamental element of going from being someone who does stand-up comedy to going to be someone who is a comedian. So your willingness to abandon material if you've developed better material is when you become a comedian. Being locked into your jokes is when you're performing stand-up comedy.
If a booker or somebody asks me, so what can you do right now? Can I confidently say without lying, I can probably do a guest spot?
Yeah, I would say that, in a club setting, I'd be comfortable auditioning for a 7-minute guest spot. Yeah, I think that'd be something I would do. What we used to do at the club that I used to run is people would come in, they get their 3 or 4 minutes on a Tuesday night. That was kind of a mishmash of professional comedians and amateur comedians. And then if they did well at that, we would give them 5 or 6 minutes on a Wednesday night that was more skewed towards paid comedians, but every now and then had an amateur on it that was trying to develop and get better. And if they succeeded at that, we would give them 12 minutes on a Wednesday And if they could start treading water at 12 minutes on a Wednesday, we would give them 7 minutes on a weekend show, which would be like with a national touring headliner. And usually your guest spot would, the first time you got a guest spot, we would do it on a Thursday night. And if you did well at that a couple times, we would promote you to the Friday nights. And then if you did really well at that, then maybe you would eventually get offered to do half of a feature spot with another comedian who's also developing. And then you get 12 minutes a few times. And that entire process is probably 3 years from going from like doing the 3-minute spot on a Tuesday to being like a 12-minute co-middle on a weekend.
Okay. I know you've got to go. So my
Yep.
final question is, I would like to meet with you again at some point. I'm already signed up for the World Series of Comedy. I'm going to do the same thing, the 6-week thing again as well.
Okay.
But I think between now and then, I might want to meet with you again one-on-one. When do you think, either by progression of where I am or time, is a good time to do that?
I would give yourself a couple months to breathe there. I don't know if so you signed up for APCA. Have you chosen a date where you're going to go and maybe do a showcase?
No, I just signed up, and
So it might be next spring or something.
it could be sooner. I just kind of got back. I stayed a few extra days and had some vacation there. I'm just
Yeah.
getting back now, so I hadn't really had a chance to think about it, but probably sooner than later.
Okay. Well, my thoughts are, if you wanted to, we could book a one-on-one session to go over what your showcase is going to be for APCA. I would probably still try, if you could, to get up on stage as much as possible over the next month before working on a finite showcase set. And then, even though you've already registered for the World Series of Comedy for next year, you don't need to submit your first video until 4 weeks before the first event. And the first event is usually like mid-February. So you have until mid-January to decide what tape you want to send in, because maybe the 4 minutes from the registered comic show is strong, but maybe between now and the middle of January, you get a really good film tape somewhere else. And so maybe that's another time we could do a one-on-one session, is like just talking about what tape to submit that gives you the better chance to be either in the top 40 or an alternate to the top 40 for the satellite events, and then as close as possible to the top 101 for the end of the year. Because once you get into an event with the World Series of Comedy, your video gets locked for the year. You can't replace it. But let's say you apply to get into Vegas for February 15th with a video that you submit, and you don't get into Vegas, and you're not one of the alternates by the time that the actual event gets performed, then you do have the opportunity to resubmit a video. So again, that's a time where we could sit and chat about stuff like that. But yeah, I would probably take a month to really focus, to try and get either on stage or on these Zoom calls as much as possible, to really refine that 5 to 7 minutes. And if, like we talked about, if you have this delineation between gigs that you think are golden fleece and gigs that you think are treading water, in the treading water ones, that's where to start a new joke, start it as a concept, something funny that happened in your life. Just talk about it. Don't even write a joke. Just talk about it on stage and find where the audience laughs. And then that's where you can do some of your new writing from.
Okay.
Cool,
And
man.
then last is an offer. As I mentioned, I worked at Honda R&D for 32 years in the quality, durability, and reliability area. Not only did I work there, I was selected among 150 associates. We were the first 150 R&D associates. So we were each managers of our area. I was the manager of quality, durability, and reliability. And what that meant was, okay, you're the manager. And I go, okay, where's my staff? They go, that's your job to hire them. They're the one. So I was in that area. I'm not just, I came along and happened to join the company. I'm a founder, and
Oh, wow.
I know all the secrets. In fact, just real quick, when they gave me my business card, it just said Joseph Jamarco, manager. And I said, why didn't you put on my name Joseph Jamarco, quality, durability, and reliability. He said, no, because Honda is basically people buy our cars because of that. That's the main reason. And we don't want anybody to know who you are because then they'll hire you and you'll tell them our secrets. So nobody knows me, but I know people who know what's going on behind the scenes know me. So what I was about to say was, it sounds like you're involved in quality as well.
Oh, no, that's just a joke.
Oh, that's a joke. Okay. I was going to say, if you ever need any help in that
Uh,
area, I'll give it to you for free.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Well, if that joke turns into reality, I'll take you up on that offer for sure.
Okay.
Cool, man. I'll send you an email with this conversation link to it. You might need to fast forward to about the 20-minute mark when you joined on, and then, but you can review it at any time.
Okay. Thank you so much. And
You
I'll
bet.
talk
Have a
to you
great day.
soon.
Sounds good, my man. Take
Bye-bye.
care.